Hello, good morning. Welcome back. Yesterday's class we did one friend function program and then we started with a new chapter, Constructors and Destructors. So in constructors we started off with objectives, what is a constructor, and then how is it useful, the characteristics of constructors, and we did two programs using constructors. So today we'll start with the third program, that is write a program to find the sum of first n natural numbers using a class constructor. So we'll be writing this program and please make a note of the program statement. So we'll start writing. How do we start? With hash include statements. Hash include iostream dot h, hash include conio dot h, and let me name my class as sum because I am going to find sum, so let me name it as sum itself. Class is a keyword, sum is the name of the class. In the private section, let me have two variables, that is int s and n. Okay, so these two are data members of the class and they are named as s and n, and they are going to hold integer value. So in the public, let me have a class constructor sum. Constructor is a function which has the same name as the class name but without any return type. So I am having sum because the name of the class is sum and the constructor is also sum. And then let me have one more function. So two functions. Let me have two functions. One is void input and then the other one is void cal underscore display. And let me close my class here. Cal underscore display, that is I am going to calculate and display. Both I will do, so let me name it that way. Or I can have three functions, one is calculate, one is input, one is calculate, and the other one is display. I can do that way also. But let me have it this way, cal underscore display. So please have a look. That is the name of the class is sum. Then I have in the private section two data members. These are data members. This is constructor and these are member functions. Okay, these two are member functions. This is the constructor and these are data members. So this is the class. And these two, what is this? Public and private are access specifiers. So I have sum is a class, private and public are access specifiers, int s comma n are data members, sum is the constructor, void input and void cal underscore display are member functions of my class, and I am terminating my class here. Have a look, then we will write, we'll define each of this outside the class. Next, let me start with a constructor. So the general way is return type, name of the class to it belongs to, scope resolution operator, and the name of the function. Since constructor do not have any return type, I will start with the name of the class it belongs to. Sum and the scope resolution operator, name of the function is sum because constructor has the same name as the class name. Okay, let me say s is equal to 0. That's what I'm going to do here. S is a data member which was declared before in the private section of the class. So I am giving an initial value to it as 0. That is, I am initializing s to 0. Next, I will write for the input function. The return type of the function was void. Name of the class to which it belongs to is sum. Scope resolution operator, and name of the function is input. So let me say cout, enter the upper limit. In n. Why is it upper limit? Because natural numbers will be starting from 1. So I wouldn't want the user to enter the lower limit as I know it. But then where should I stop? Till what? So I'm asking the user to enter the upper limit and I'm storing it in n. And again, n was declared in the private section of the class as an integer variable. So sum is initialized to 0 in the constructor, and I have another input function wherein I am asking the user to enter the upper limit and I am taking it in n. Have a look. After that, let me write for cal underscore display function. So it was void. Then the name of the class to which it belongs to is sum. Scope resolution operator, and then cal underscore display. So what should I do here? So I'll put, since I need to find the sum from 1 to n, wherein n is also included, it's a repetitive task. So it is repeated addition. So I need to put it in an iterative statement. I can use while or I can use for. So let me use for here. For int I is equal to 1, I less than or equal to n, I plus plus, s is equal to s plus I close my for here. I will write the trace of this. Cout sum n. Okay. This completes my function. So what am I doing here? See, I need to find up 1 to n. So let me say if as a user I enter n as 3. So I need to find 1 plus 2 plus 3, the sum of this, correct? So let me come here, int I. How does the for loop works? First the initialization and then the condition. It will go inside if this condition is satisfied, and then it will go back to the increment or the decrement section. Then check the condition and go inside the loop. The first time it gets executed, the initialization takes place. So I have for int I. Why am I writing int here? Because I have not declared I in the private section of the class. So if I write just I is equal to 1, it will give you variable not declared error. So I just declaring int I is equal to 1. Why is it 1? Because natural number starts from 1. So I less than or equal to n and I plus plus, s is equal. So let me say suppose n is equal to 3. In the first iteration, what happens? I is equal to 1. When I is equal to 1, what happens? Definitely I is less than 3. It will come here. S is equal to, what is the value of s? In the constructor, I had initialized it to 0. So 0 plus what is I? 1. That is 1 would be stored in s. It will go back. I plus plus is nothing but I is equal to I plus 1. So I becomes 2. because I was 1 here, then the next iteration I becomes 2. So when I is equal to 2, 2 definitely is less than 3. It will come here. S is equal to S plus I. So in the first iteration, the value of S was 1. So 1 plus 2, that is 3. Go back, increment the value of I. I becomes 2 plus 1, that is 3. So I is equal to 3 now. 3 is definitely equal to 3 because I have I less than or equal to n. So it is equal to n. That is true. It will come here. S is equal to, what was the S value in the previous iteration? It was 3 plus what is the I value? 3. That is 6. Okay. And it will go back, increment the value of I. I becomes 4. Then 4 is neither less than 3 or equal to 3. It exits the for loop and it will print here. Sum will be printed as it is and n. Should I print n here? No, I need to print s here because s is the one which holds the value of the sum. Okay, this is how the program works. If I print n here, it will print me 3 again. Syntactically it is correct, but logically it will be wrong. So whenever you're printing something, you have to be very careful which variable you're printing, because as I had written n, it will not give me any syntax error because it's a valid statement. So I would be printing 3, whereas my program was to print the sum, not the upper limit. That is why you need to print the s value because s is going to hold the sum. So that is why print s here. Then it will print me 6 here. Have a look. Now I have to write my main because I finished writing my class and all the functions of the class, including the constructor. But then I need to write my main. Without main, my program will not work, right? So void main clear screen. Fine. After that, I need to create an object for the class. So sum SOBJ, let me name it as that. So what happens? Okay, we'll finish this, then I'll tell you what happens in each line. Then I have to say SOBJ dot input because I need to take the n value first, that is the upper limit value, then only I can execute my program. Then after that, SOBJ dot cal underscore display. Then get ch close my main. So what happens here? Once I create an object, constructor is executed. Yes, when an object is created, constructor automatically gets executed. So when the constructor gets executed, the s value gets initialized to 0. After that, here n value is taken. And here it is calculated and sum is calculated and displayed. Correct? So this is your program. We wrote the trace of this, and I also told you like logically how I can write a wrong program, wherein syntactically it will be correct. So make sure when you're writing it, you pay attention that what needs to be get printed. Have a look, then hopefully you have understood this. Yeah, now we'll start with types of constructors. What are the different types of constructors available? The first one is the default constructor. Second is the parameterized constructor, constructor with default arguments, and copy constructors. These are the different types of constructors: default, parameterized, constructor with default arguments, and copy constructors. So we will do each constructor, type of constructor in detail with one example program. So please make a note of this. We'll start with default constructor. So what do you mean by default constructor? A constructor without arguments is called a default constructor. Like last program, we had a constructor called sum. So it has no arguments to it, right? So constructor without any arguments is called a default constructor. Fine. Then features of, what are the different features of a default constructor? Every object created, for every object created, this constructor is automatically run. The previous last class we did this. We created 3 objects for the student class like std1 and std2 and 3, and then we had written in the student class wherein it printed thrice. So every time a new object is created for the class, the default constructor is automatically run, which means that you have 10 objects, then 10 times the constructor would be automatically run. Or all objects are initialized to the same set of values. Like in the S constructor, I had S is equal to 0. So I create around 10 objects to this. Then for all the 10 objects, the S value will have a 0 only. Getting it? Like I have around 10 objects I create for a class sum. And in the constructor, that is in the default constructor, I have initial value S is equal to 0. So for all those 10 objects, the initial value of sum would be 0. When a user defined class does not contain, like if you don't write a constructor also, like if I don't write the constructor also, the compiler will automatically invoke the default constructor whether you write it or not. But then if you want to give initial values, you need to write it. Like even if you don't write a constructor, the compiler will automatically invoke a default constructor whenever you create an object. That is, when a user defined class does not contain an explicit constructor, the compiler automatically invokes a default constructor. And declaring a constructor with arguments, that is, if you have parameterized constructor, then it hides the default constructor. So please go through this. These are the different features of a default constructor. A default constructor means constructor without any arguments. The next is disadvantages of default constructor. So the thing is that if I have 10 different data members in my class and I have given initial values to it, so any number of objects I create will have the same set of initial values. That is, I cannot change the initial values of those based on my object. Like for example, object 1 I need initial value S is equal to 0. For object 2 I would want the initial value as 10. But then you cannot do it. That is, when many objects of the same class are created, all the objects are initialized to the same set of values by the default constructor. That is, you cannot have, it is not possible to initialize different objects with different initial values using default constructor. That is, the initial values remains the same. Any number of objects you create, you cannot change the initial values for each object. That is what it means. So it's definitely a disadvantage because you may not want the same initial values for all the objects created. Next is the general syntax of a default constructor. Class name, yes, constructor is written in a class. Private, you have data members. Constructor should always be written in the public section of the class. So you need to specify explicitly public. If you don't specify anything, by default it will be private. So if you want it public, you need to specify it as public, and constructors should always be written in the public section of the class. Then class name, because constructor is a function which has the same name as the class name and it does not have any return type, so there is no return type here. And then I will have open and close braces, and then the initialization statements. End of my class can have different other member functions also, and then I will terminate my class. This is the general syntax of a default constructor, and here I have no arguments. Fine. I have no arguments. That is why it is blank. Have a look. This is the general syntax of a default constructor. Now we will do one program for default constructor. This is the statement of the program. Write a program to demonstrate the default initialization of constructor member function of a class called point. So what is the name of the class? The name of the class is point. The constructor name also will be point, since the name of the class and the name of the constructor should be same. The point class has two member variables, x and y. So x and y are the two data members of the class point, where x represents the x coordinate and y represents the y coordinate of a point object in x and y coordinate system. Fine. So what you have to do is we'll write one program where it gives the initial value for the x and the y coordinate, and we will print it. So the name of the class is point and the name of the constructor will also be point, and we need to use a default constructor, which means that there will be no arguments passed to the constructor. Fine. Please go through this statement and make a note of it. So we'll start writing. How do we start? With hash include statements. Hash include iostream.h. Hash include conivo.h. Then I will start with my class declaration. How do I start? Class is a keyword, and everything, all the keywords has to be written in lowercase only. So class, and what was the name of the class? Point. Fine. Because according to the program statement, it has to be point. I have point, then I have private. What was the two data members? It was x and y. Let it be int x, comma y. Or do you want it as float? Whichever you can select. So I will say x and y. Then I will have data members. First public, then I have to have a constructor. So constructor has to be written in the public section of the class. And since this is a program to illustrate the use of a default constructor, what does default constructor mean? It means that the constructor takes no arguments. So I will say point and no arguments, and then I will have void display. So which will display the x coordinate and the y coordinate values, and then I will close my class and terminate it. So these two are the data members. And this is the constructor, default constructor, and this is a member function, and this is the class, and these two are access specifiers. Okay, so what are the data members? X and y, and I have a default constructor point, and void display is the member function of the class, which will print me the initialized values of x and y, and then this is the default constructor. Please make a note of this. Now I will start with the constructor. So since constructor do not have a return type, and that is why there will be no return type, name of the class and the name of the function, which is this. So let me say x is equal to 0, y is equal to 0. This is the initial values I am giving, 0, 0. X coordinate is 0, y coordinate is 0. Now let me write the display function. Void display. So cout, sorry, since this is a class function, how do I write it? Void, the name of the class is point, scope resolution operator, and display. So cout x coordinate x and L, then cout y coordinate y and L. Let me finish my function here. So void, that is the return type of display was void, name of the class to which it belongs to is point, scope resolution operator, and display. So cout x coordinate will be printed as it is, and then I am printing the value of x. Now let me write my main function. So how do I write my main function? Void main, okay, then clear screen. Now I have to create an object to the class point. So point POBJ, let POBJ be my object, and then I need to call my display function. Okay, POBJ dot display, and then get ch. Fine, here get ch, and I am closing my main. So what happens here? Here, when I create an object, the default constructor would be automatically executed. So it runs the default constructor. So the default constructor gets run here. It is executed. What am I doing in the default constructor? I am giving initial values to x and y. So x is initialized to 0 and y gets initialized to 0. So automatically the initial values are given. Default constructor means a constructor without any arguments. So after that, since display is a member function, how do I call a member function? By object dot the function. So when I execute display, what would be the output? The output would be, it will print me x coordinate and 0, y equal to 0, and then it. So when you create an object, the default constructor would be run. So when I created POBJ, the default constructor point got executed. In point, I had written x, I had given initial values to x and y. So in display function, it will just print me the initial values here. So this would be the output of my program when I execute it. So this completes the default constructors. So you please have a look and go through this. Now we'll start with parameterized constructors. As the name suggests, it means that we are going to pass parameters to the constructor. So a parameterized constructor is nothing but a constructor with arguments. Without arguments is a default constructor. With arguments is a parameterized constructor. So the features, what are the features of parameterized constructors? It is possible to initialize different objects with different values. Yes, with default, it is the same for any number of objects created, whereas with parameterized constructors, I can have different initial values for different objects. The parameterized constructor can be overloaded. What do you mean by overloaded? That is, I can have more than one parameterized constructor which differs in the number of arguments or the type of the arguments passed. When I say type, it means the data type. So it can be number of arguments or the type of arguments passed. I can have more than one parameterized constructor. So it means that it can be overloaded. So for an object created with one argument, constructor with only one argument is invoked. So for example, if I am passing only one parameter, so when you create an object with one parameter value passed, it will invoke the corresponding constructor. A parameterized constructor can have default arguments and default values. So this one we will do when I do default arguments. You will be able to understand this point properly. So parameterized constructor is a constructor with arguments, and it is possible to have different initial values for different objects, and it can be overloaded. Overloaded again if it is different in the number or the type of arguments. And then if suppose you have created an object, if you have created a constructor with one parameter, then when you create an object with one argument, that gets invoked. So depending on the number of arguments or the type of arguments during object creation, that corresponding constructor gets invoked. So this point we'll do when we do default arguments. Please make a note of this. Now we'll say how to call a parameterized constructor. Please make a note. This is a 5-mark question. So they can ask you for 2 marks also, 5 marks also. It is a commonly and repeatedly asked question. So methods of calling: explicit call, implicit call, and if there is only one parameter, you can also use the assignment operator equal to. So these are the different ways of invoking or calling a parameterized constructor: implicit, explicit, and initialization at the time of declaration with equal to operator, and only one condition for equal to operator is there should be only one parameter, that is constructor with one parameter can be invoked or called using the equal to operator. This can be one or many. You can have either an implicit call or an explicit call. These are the three ways of calling a parameterized constructor. Default constructor, as soon as you create an object, the default constructor gets executed. For parameterized constructor, there are three ways. One is implicit, explicit, and with an equal to operator. But then you can use equal to if the constructor has only one parameter, whereas implicit and explicit can work with any number of arguments passed. Now, parameterized constructor program we will do with implicit, explicit, and equal to operator. Fine. And this one is commonly they will ask you explain the implicit call with an example, explicit call with an example, or they will ask you the ways of calling a constructor and explain one of them. So anything you can write this program, you can write the general syntax and explain. So we'll start with the first one. Write a program to find the product of first n numbers by passing argument to the constructor using implicit call. So using implicit call, you need to pass the argument to the constructor. Again, the constructor is a parameterized constructor. And what is the program doing? It is going to find the product of first n natural numbers. Please make a note of the program statement so that we can start writing the program. We'll start with the general syntax. So how do I do that? When for implicit call, for example, when I create an object, like how do I create an object in main? So class, the general syntax is class name, okay, and the object name, and then you write the value. So this is how you do it. For example, if my class, for example, class is sum, I have a class sum and I need to pass two values to it. So suppose I want to pass a and b, wherein a and b are two values which I need to pass. So I have a is equal to 10, b is equal to 20, and I need to pass it. How do I do that? In main. I'm talking in main. I'm not writing the entire program. For implicit call, what was the name of the class? The name of the class was sum. Okay. And this is the object name. And then I will say a comma b. This is how you pass an object, pass values to a constructor using implicit call. And when you have the statement, it will execute the corresponding parameterized constructor. So sum is the name of a class. I'm creating, what am I doing here? I'm creating an object here. Yes, obj. How do I create an object? Class name space the object name, and during that time only in bracket I will give, suppose some constructor takes two integer values, so I will be giving two values a comma b. So a comma b is passed to that and that gets executed. This is called the implicit call. Now we will write a program so that you will understand it in a proper way. So implicit call, class name, object name, and the values you give it here only during the object creation. So when you are creating an object, you give the values after the creation, like with a bracket, is called implicit call. So when you do that, that corresponding parameterized constructor which matches, like which has two arguments of the type integer, gets executed. Now we will write the program. So what was the program? The program was to find the sum of first n natural numbers by passing arguments to a parameterized constructor using implicit call. So we'll start writing it. How do I start that? I will be starting with hash include statements. Hash include iostream.h, and there is no space over here, okay. conio.h. Then let me have my class, and since I am finding the product, let me name it as product itself. And what will be the variable? I need to have a product variable, right? So let me say int p, okay. I will have a variable called p, and then it should be private. If I don't specify anything, also it is private, but let me do it, okay. In public, I will have a parameterized constructor. So what is the name of the class? Product, and it will not have any return type. So what am I passing to that? I am going to pass an integer value to it, okay. I'll keep it like this, and after that let me have a member function which displays the product. So void display, or you can say in display, wherein in the main I will print it, whichever way you want. And I'm closing my class. So what happens? Class product, this is class, and then p is the data member, and this is the constructor with parameters. How many parameters are there? 1. And what is the data type of it? Is int. So constructor, and this is the member function. So have a look and make a note. Now we'll write the definition of the class functions. So let me start with the constructor. So since it does not have any return type, I will start. The name of the class was product, and the name of the constructor was also product, and I have to pass one integer value to it, right? Let it be n. So I will start with p is equal to 1. Why is it 1? Because I am finding the product, and n would be passed from main. So this is the thing. After that, what will I do? So since again it's a repetitive thing, so if I want to find the product from 1 to 4, for example n value is 4, then I should say 1 into 2 into 3 into 4. This is the final value should be given, yeah. The same way I will be writing it here. P is equal to 1, because if I make it 0, then the end product will be 0. So when you are writing the sum, always make s is equal to 0, because anything plus 0 does not change the value. Same way, when you are finding the product, make it as 1, because again 1 into anything remains the same. Don't make it as 0, otherwise the end result would be 0. Now for int I is equal to 1, because I am going to find from 1 to n. Okay, I less than or equal to n, I plus plus, we'll say p is equal to p star I, and I will close it here. I will close my constructor here. So what am I doing in my constructor? I am going to pass the n value, that is nothing but the upper limit value from the main, because here n is the upper limit. So p is equal to 1, yes, because I am finding the product. For int I is equal to 1, for example, I am passing n is equal to 4 here. What happens? We will write a trace of this. I is equal to 1. Okay, I is equal to 1. I is less than n. I is less than 4. True. It will come here. P is equal to p star I. So p is equal to, what was the value of p here? 1. 1 into, what is the value of I? 1. So p becomes 1. Go back, increment the value of I. So I will be 2 when I is 2, and what is n value? N is 4. So 2 is less than 4. It will come here. P is equal to, what was the previous value of, what was the value of I in the previous iteration? It was 1. So I will say 1 star I is 2, is nothing but 2. So this is the value of P now. Go back, increment the value of I is equal to 3. So when I becomes 3, 3 is less than 4, it will come here. P is equal to, what was the value of P in the previous iteration? It is 2 star I is nothing but 3. So what will it be? 6. So 6 would be stored. It will go back, increment the value of I becomes 4. So it will come here. What is the value of n? N is also 4. So 4 is equal to 4. So it is true. It will come here. P is equal to P. What was the value of P in the previous iteration? It was 6. 6 star 4. 24. So what is the value of P here? 24. It will go back, increment the value of I becomes 5. So neither, it will check for the condition, 5 is neither less than 4 or equal to 4, it stops. So when the for loop stops, the final value of P would be 24 for the n value 4, which is passed from the main. So this is how your constructor would work. Hopefully you have understood this. Now I need to write my display function. So what was the return type of the function? Void name of the class, scope resolution operator, and display. So cout product and P. This is the end of my class. Now I need to write my main. How do I write? Void main. Clear screen. I will say int n. Cout, enter the upper limit C in n. So when the user, what is n? It's an integer value. So the data type of this n and that n should match. Name need not match, but both of them are integers. So first I am asking the user to enter the upper limit and I am taking in the upper limit. After that I have to create an object, correct? So what was the name of the class? Product. Then for example, if I say POBJ is my object, then I will pass the n value to it. So this one is implicit constructor call. How do I do? I have to create an object and then I am passing the n value. Where is n value taken? I have taken it from the user. So when you execute this statement, then the parameterized constructor with one parameter gets executed. This value, whatever has the user entered, will be substituted there, and then the for loop would run from 1 to n, whatever is the n value entered by the user. Once the constructor is run, what do you do in the constructor? You calculate the product and then you need to display it. And which function is that you display? You display it in the display function. And what is the display function? It is a normal member function. So how do I call a function? I call it by object dot the function name. So what was the object? What is the name of the function? Display. And then I will say this. This will print me the output. What is that p value? Nothing but the output. Then get ch, close my main. So this is how you call a parameterized constructor implicitly. Implicit call. This is nothing but implicit call. Constructor call. That is, I am calling the constructor implicit call. A parameterized constructor, how do you call it? During the object creation only. So I am creating an object POBJs and I am passing the n value. So from where have I taken the n value? I have taken it from the user. What is the n value? It is the upper limit. Right? Have a look. And this is very important. So today's class we did default types of constructors, default constructor, the characteristics of it, disadvantages of it. Then we did one program, and then we did parameterized constructor. What are the different ways to run it, and advantages, disadvantages also we did. And we did one program wherein we use the implicit call to call a parameterized constructor. Next class we will be doing the other two types with examples. Hope you have understood it. Please go through the class. If you have not understood, do it again so that you will not forget. Homework questions, please make a note. The first question, what is a constructor? Give the rules for writing a constructor function. The next is, what are default constructor? Explain it with a programming example. Explain with a programming example. Please make a note of today's homework question. So, take care. We'll meet tomorrow. Bye-bye.